Every year when the Philadelphia Eagles schedule comes out, there's always certain things that I'm looking for, that I'm hoping for. So today I decided to build an ideal 2025 schedule for the Birds before the schedule is released. We'll get into that coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Welcome in, Eagles fans, this Tuesday edition of the show. I'm your host, as always, Louis DiBiase, giving you your daily dose of Philadelphia Eagles coverage Monday through Friday. Tomorrow's going to be a fun one. The Eagles' 2025 schedule officially does release, although the NFL, it's really funny, they've been leaking games the last few days, like what's going to happen on Black Friday, a Saturday doubleheader later in the year in December. What's the season opener? We know it's Eagles-Cowboys. Black Friday is Eagles-Bears. We know the Eagles and the Commanders are playing each other in a Saturday doubleheader with a different matchup as well. It feels like every single release or leak the NFL has given to us about the schedule has to do with the Philadelphia Eagles. So it's great for us, but I know a lot of football fans from other fan bases, and they're getting a little bit disgruntled because even today, earlier in the morning, it was released that the Eagles will be playing the Green Bay Packers Week 10 at Lambeau Field on Monday Night Football. So we already know 4 games for the Eagles. They play Week 1 against Dallas. They play Week 10, Monday Night Football against Green Bay. They play, I think, is it Week 13, right, against Chicago, Black Friday. And then they also play Week 16 on Saturday against the Commanders. So we have 4 games figured out. 13 to go. Tomorrow night we'll go live after the schedule is released. So make sure you subscribe to the show on YouTube and all podcast platforms as well. It'll be posted in audio form after it goes live as well. So again, tomorrow we'll get officially all of the games for all 17 weeks, including that 18th week, like where that bye week is also very important. There's always certain things like that, though, that I'm looking for. Before the schedule comes out, I say to myself, like, I really hope there's no gauntlet of a stretch like there was in 2023 where the NFL just compiles all your tough matchups into one spot. I hope there's not a lot of stretches where you're on the road for, 4 or 5 weeks. I don't like when the bye week is early. I don't like when the schedule is tougher at the top of the schedule, at the top of the year. I'd rather have it be spread out or maybe pushed back a little bit because I think every NFL team is rusty in the beginning. I'd rather be able to stock up some wins, gain momentum against worse teams early on, and then when you're really cooking with gas, then you take on the Chiefs, then you take on the Bills, then you take on, the Commanders and all of these other really good teams in both conferences. So there's things like that that I'm always looking for before the schedule comes out and hoping for the Eagles. So what I decided to do today before the schedule does come out, I built my own schedule. Like this is what, based on everything that I look for, this would be my ideal best case scenario schedule that the NFL would put together for the Eagles. Now I know this is not going to happen, but for me, if it's all about the Eagles and I spread things out very evenly, which is what I would want for this team, a balanced schedule, here's what I came up with. So, of course, we know Week 1 is against the Dallas Cowboys. We know Week 10 is against Green Bay. We've got Week 13 against Chicago, Week 16 against Washington. Those 4 games are set in stone. Working around that, what would I want? As I said, I really want the top of the schedule to be a little bit easier. Now, that's comparatively speaking, of course, because the Eagles have a first-place schedule. They have one of the toughest schedules in football. So there are not a lot of gimme games. Not that there are a lot anyway in the NFL, but that's why at the top, if you'll see, I have Week 2 at Minnesota taking on a rookie quarterback in J.J. McCarthy. Try to get them early on when they're still figuring out who he is as a quarterback. And the Eagles always destroy the Vikings Week 2. Like, that just feels like it's a yearly occurrence now. It's an annual thing. They're either beating up on the Vikings or Kirk Cousins, right? Although last year they did lose to the Falcons, but they should have won that game. I feel like Week 2, it's always whoever Kirk Cousins is quarterbacking, and most of the time that's the Minnesota Vikings. So I would love to get the Vikings Week 2. Like, give me the Raiders at home Week 3. And then again, like, there's not a lot of easy matchups. So I had them going on the road, back-to-back games against the Chargers and the Giants before really tough home games in a back-to-back stretch against the Detroit Lions and the Washington Commanders. And again, I like to have a bye week kind of in the middle. I don't want it too late so these guys are limping to the finish line, super beat up before the playoffs. But although last year the bye week was really important to have it after that fourth game because the Eagles were in an identity crisis, they were rattled after that Tampa Bay loss. Like, if they didn't have that bye week to make the necessary changes that they had to after that game, if they didn't have that bye, man, I don't know. I think they still would have probably corrected things, but that bye week was so crucial for everybody to look themselves in the mirror. If it's not there, there's a much better chance. I'm not predicting it, but there was a much better chance that the Eagles do completely collapse again, like they did in 2023. So it was important for them last year, but normally you don't want to have a bye week after 4 games, and then you have to go 13 straight weeks before the playoffs. And especially when there's only one team. There's 2 top seeds in the conference, but there's only one team now that gets a bye week. Considering your odds of getting a bye in the playoffs are a lot more difficult than they used to be. That's why a bye week later on is even more important. So I had it a little earlier than I would like, but I would say after 7 games. So yeah, you're almost halfway through the year. Week 8, I gave them the bye week because then here come like the really tough ones. I had them going back-to-back road games at Tampa Bay, at Green Bay on Monday Night Football. That Tampa game is what I'm circling. The Eagles just cannot win in Tampa Bay. I am so sick of seeing that stupid stadium. Every time the Eagles play in September, a sunny game where they have to wear midnight green at that stadium, like I just know they're going to get walked. I really hope they get revenge on the Buccaneers this year. They slay those demons. I hope the game is later on in the season when it's not as hot. It just feels like 2018. The Eagles are in Tampa Bay in September. 2021, wearing midnight green, warm temperature in Tampa Bay. That was in the playoffs, but just the same conditions. You go to 2024 in Tampa Bay in September. I hate that. I would like it to be later on. So I had them coming off the bye week. You get rested. That would be the best chance. That's when I want the crack at the Buccaneers, is coming off the bye week. Let's go get some revenge. And then that's the toughest stretch. At Tampa Bay, at Green Bay. I gave them home against Denver before they go back into Buffalo to take on the Bills. So again, it was hard to really spread this thing out. There was going to be tough stretches no matter what. I prefer them in the middle or later on in the year. So I decided ideally it would be after the bye week, 3 or 4 games on the road, not ideal. Tampa Bay, Green Bay, Buffalo, Denver smushed in there at home at the Link, but you had to do it eventually. And then at the end, home against Chicago, you go to Arrowhead later on in the year. You take on the Rams at home, at Washington, at Dallas, at New York. That would be my ideal schedule for the Eagles when you're combining just an overall balance, a later bye week, not a lot of tough stretches where you're on the road, it feels like for a month and a half, right? I think I spread out things pretty well when it comes to home versus away. I like to have an easier schedule at the top. So I feel like I did that with games against, Dallas, I think is easier than Kansas City and Buffalo and Washington, and lost the Rams. So Dallas, Minnesota, Vegas. You get the Giants in there as well at the top of the schedule. Still some tough ones, right? You got the Chargers, Lions, and the Commanders there before the bye week, but that's life with a first-place schedule. So that's kind of what I look for. Again, not that I'm scared of these other teams from the start of the jump, in the beginning of the season, but every NFL team is rusty and finding their footing, finding their new identity in the beginning of the year. So I'd much rather have the easier teams, the less talented teams like a Vegas Raiders or a Minnesota Vikings, even though they won 14 games last year. Early on, they're a team with a rookie quarterback that's going to be rusty, and they're definitely going to be finding their footing. So I like normally when it's mostly about just pure talent early on in the year, I kind of like to have it be a little bit of an easier schedule. So that's my ideal 2025 schedule for the Eagles. I know tomorrow will not look like that, but I think I like it balanced, and we'll see. I don't know. I am hoping there's no gauntlet of a month and a half like there was in 2023, because that takes a toll on a team, and we saw that a couple years ago. All right, guys, coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast, doing this mock schedule, taking a look at some of these matchups. The Eagles play a lot more really good quarterbacks, a lot of star quarterbacks, high-level QB1s this year compared to last year. I think it's going to require Jalen Hurts to be a different football player this year, and I'll tell you what I mean by that coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. Today's episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are in full swing, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and to win big. I've been winning huge lately on Russell Westbrook. I'm about to make that bet right now, actually, for this next game against the Oklahoma City Thunder. The over on his points for coming off the bench, it's been hitting. So I'm betting with Russell Westbrook and the Denver Nuggets. You can bet on anything in the NBA with FanDuel. It's the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you'll get $200 back in bonus bets. So make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, so as I was doing that mock ideal 2025 schedule for the Philadelphia Eagles, and I was putting together this graphic and throwing in all these, quarterback pictures, I started to notice, I'm like, wow, they play Josh Allen this year. They play Jaden Daniels twice. They play Matt Stafford again. They play Patrick Mahomes. I think it's likely Dak Prescott isn't hurt again for both matchups. We know they're going to likely play Dak Prescott week 1 at least. Maybe if they play him later on, who knows what's going to happen. Him and Jalen Hurts have only played against each other 3 times since 2020, but you're likely going to play Dak Prescott multiple times this year. Jordan Love is still, to me, an ascending player at the position. Justin Herbert, as overrated as I think he is, he's still a very, very good quarterback that's extremely talented. And like some of the worst quarterbacks you play are like high risers or really high floor players like Jared Goff. You've got Caleb Williams. Maybe he breaks out this year. Bo Nix in year 2. I don't know what Jackson Dart's going to be. I really like his game coming out of Ole Miss. As much as I don't like the Giants, if you told me that Jackson Dart was a solid player in his rookie year, starting for New York at the end of the season over Russell Wilson, I wouldn't be surprised. So compared to 2024, I really do think the Eagles play a lot tougher of a quarterback schedule than they did last year. Last year you had Joe Burrow, you had Lamar Jackson, you had Matt Stafford, and that's really about it. Like Jaden Daniels really wasn't a star quarterback until the end of the year, and you didn't have Jalen Hurts for that game. So when Jalen was playing, you really only had 3 big matchups. It was against Burrow, it was against Lamar, and it was against Matt Stafford. Like I said, this year you're looking at potentially 2 matchups against Jaden Daniels, 2 against Dak Prescott. You got Pat Mahomes, Josh Allen, Stafford, Herbert, Jordan Love. Like I said, maybe Caleb Williams or Bo Nix take the step. So it's going to be tough. And I really do think this year, Jalen Hurts is going to have to, quote-unquote, flip the switch more in 2025 than he did in 2024. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. So, of course, this defense I still think is going to be elite this year. Last year, it was the number 1 ranked defense overall. Not sure if it's going to be number 1 in football again, but it's going to be top 5 in my opinion. And there's going to be games where that defense completely shuts down some of these players. So I'm not saying suddenly Hurts is going to have to carry you because the defense is going to become a liability or Saquon Barkley can't carry you in the run game. But I will say, with that being said, there will be more games where quarterbacks have more success, that you get caught in some more shootouts than you did last year, where, Joe Burrow last year, for instance, that was one game where a star quarterback got hot. The defense made some key plays late to give the Eagles the win, but Jalen Hurts really won you that game. He was matching Joe Burrow blow for blow, touchdown for touchdown. That was a shootout, a duel between 2 star quarterbacks. I thought that was, I would probably say outside of the Pittsburgh game, maybe it's that or Cincinnati. That was probably Jalen Hurts' most impressive performance of the regular season, at least in my opinion. It's between that and Pittsburgh. So I think, that was really the only time that he had to do that last year, where he had to carry this football team with his arm. Although the Green Bay game week 1 was kind of like that too. But there weren't many instances. This year, I think there will be more times where they need that version of Jalen, hero ball Jalen, Superman Jalen, the guy that needs to flip the switch and become the MVP finalist he was in 2022. They'll need to see that MVP favorite in the first half of 2023 that was carrying the Eagles against the Buffalo Bills and the Kansas City Chiefs and the Miami Dolphins and the Dallas Cowboys in that gauntlet. Like he was against the Rams as well. he was carrying you in so many of those football games. I'm not saying the Eagles defense, as I mentioned before, they're going to start getting blown out of the water, but they play a lot of really good quarterbacks. I don't think the Eagles are going to completely stop all of those guys. I mean, last year they did a great job limiting Lamar Jackson, limiting Matt Stafford, forcing Jaden Daniels to get turnovers. In the playoffs, they completely shut down Daniels again and Patrick Mahomes. But hey, look in the playoffs in the divisional round. Matt Stafford, he got hot in the second half, and you needed this offense to make a couple plays at the end to hang on. So I think you're going to see that. You're going to need to see that more from Jalen this year than last year. And I don't think there should be any doubt that he can do that. I still see some doubt, not as much as like an Eagle fans, but the national back and forth debate about who Jalen Hurts is a quarterback. It still feels like people think he can't do that. He doesn't have that gear in him. He can't flip that switch whenever he wants to, like some of these other all-time, or not all-time great quarterbacks, but those guys as well. The greats in the league right now, the Josh Allens, the Pat Mahomes, the Joe Burrows, the Lamar Jacksons. I still think people don't think he has that kind of switch in him like those guys. But since 2021, I think he's been proven to have the switch. I don't know. Like, for me, you look at 2022, look at the regular season, how he was just throwing all over defenses and being the reason that you were winning. You were winning football games in 2022 because of the passing game. In the playoffs as well. Look at that Super Bowl performance against Kansas City. 2023, the defense was not good. Yeah, Jalen Hurts has always had an incredible support system, especially on the offensive side of the football since he's been in Philadelphia, or at least the majority of the time. But in 2023, like the run game was kind of inconsistent as well. He had to carry you. And of course, he had A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, and Dallas Goedert to throw to. But Jalen clearly had an MVP kind of switch. And I think he still has that. I think he's going to have to use that more than he did last year. Last year, he only needed it really a couple times against Cincinnati. He needed it against Washington and against Kansas City. I don't know if he needed it, but he had it in those games. So that switch is there. And I think what I like about his switch compared to some other players, not just in football, but in other sports, is that I think he learned last year what a lot of all-time greats that become all-time greats, he learned what they do, what they've learned in the past. That to be a good team, it can't always be about you getting yours to win. Like, you can't always think I have to flip this switch or I want to flip this switch in order to get this win. Like, every game, that's what is required of me. I think when you get to be that kind of player, a Carson Wentz never knew when to turn that switch off, and a lot of times it started to hurt his football team. I think when you look at, like, in the NBA, for instance, when a guy's like, he's a walking bucket, but he only gets his, and he doesn't elevate other players around him. He doesn't know when to turn that switch off. A lot of times those guys don't get rings, right? In the NBA, I look at guys like Carmelo Anthony and, Russell Westbrook, for instance, although that's my guy. Like, it's true. Those one-trick ponies. I think Jalen Hurts learned last year when to step back and be a game manager, when he needs to allow the other parts of this team to elevate as well. Like, because you're going to need those guys later on. So make them better. Make them carry you as well. Like, you have to be able to do that. You have to be able to facilitate. Just be a point guard in a way. And then when it's required of you to flip that switch, like it was last year against Cincinnati, he can do that. When you need to prove it to the world, he can do that against Pittsburgh. I think LeBron James learned this along the way in his career. So did Steph Curry in football. Pat Mahomes did. The last few years, he has learned that. Josh Allen learned it last year too, along with Jalen Hurts. Tom Brady learned this very early on in his career. A lot of the all-time greats in sports have learned that, yes, you have to have that switch to be great, to be elite as a quarterback, to be elite as a star, the face of a franchise in any sport. But I will say a lot of great scorers, quote unquote, a lot of great individual performers, even Cam Newton in the NFL. Those guys that didn't get rings, I think it's because they did not learn to evolve. And so I know last year Jalen kind of got knocked around for evolving in that way. A lot of people, including myself early on, thought he was regressing. But now I see it as evolution. I think he learned to be a different player. He learned that not every game requires him to be the same person. And he has said that verbatim in press conferences. And he even said it after the Pittsburgh game. He's like, just because we don't do something doesn't mean we can't. I think this year, they're going to try to not do that every single game, but I think there will be more instances because of the layout of the schedule where Jalen does have to flip that 2022, 2023 like switch compared to how often he had to in 2024. And I think he can do it. Is it as consistent of a switch as Josh Allen or Joe Burrow or Pat Mahomes from a passing perspective? No. But his switch, the good thing about Jalen Hurts is that switch can be turned on in different ways. Like, he could become an elite runner that day. It could be about the deep ball. He can carve you up from a progression standpoint, accuracy, anticipation inside the pocket from time to time, like he did against Kansas City and against Washington in the playoffs. So that's the other thing about Jalen is, again, I've said it on the show before, he's elite in different ways. Like, his version of elite play doesn't look the same as other quarterbacks, and it's why people knock him for it. But elite is elite. And I think this year when they need Jalen Hurts to be elite, he'll be able to answer the bell. And I think he's going to have to do it because, again, looking at this mock schedule, there are a lot of really good quarterbacks on this schedule. And who's the worst one? It's like probably J.J. McCarthy, just based on we know nothing about his game. Or I guess maybe like the worst guys are pretty solid starters. Geno Smith, Jared Goff, Baker Mayfield, Dak Prescott. Maybe it's Jackson Dart or Russell Wilson, whoever's starting for the Giants, but it's a really, really tough quarterback schedule for the Eagles. So I think they're going to need Jalen a little bit more to elevate, to carry, I should say, than they did last year, and I think he's ready for it. All right, guys, coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast, I want to wrap things up talking about Trey Hendrickson. I just saw his interview talking about his situation with the Bengals and a future contract. Could the Eagles consider reopening things with a potential Hendrickson trade if they were considering it before? Let's get into that coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. All right, guys, so I just saw that Trey Hendrickson interview with the media and how he made it public that he's not happy with the current situation with the Bengals and their contract talks for a long-term deal. He was talking about how it's personal at this point. I don't think a deal, knowing the Bengals and their history and the fact that they just shelled out a ton of money to Jamar Chase, to Joe Burrow, and to T. Higgins, I can't imagine they're going to give Trey Hendrickson a deal either. So I think it's very likely that Hendrickson, especially the way he's talking, that he's probably done with the Bengals. And I think the way the Bengals are handling it, the fact that they drafted Shamar Stewart in the first round on the edge, it means probably that they're done with him too. So if that's the case, naturally we have to ask ourselves, should the Eagles consider or even reconsider trading for him? I'm not sure if they were interested earlier in the offseason process when that name was being thrown around and clumped in there with, the Myles Garretts of the world. But if he does become available again, or if he is available right now, should the Eagles consider? I think there's a few different ways to think about this. I think on the surface, it seems like a no-brainer, especially for a team like the Eagles that love elite pass rushers in their prime, right? And Howie Roseman loves to trade. He's got a lot of draft picks. They're in a Super Bowl win-now window. Hendrickson is a player that could be the missing piece. The edge rushing position right now still has some questions on this roster. So naturally, on the surface, it seems like an obvious move. And I think the asking price might be a lot lower now than we think, considering the situation. Like, Hendrickson's not going to go for a first-round pick or maybe even a second-rounder. He might end up going for maybe a couple thirds, maybe a day 2 pick and a couple day 3 selections. I'm not sure. Maybe it costs a 2, but nobody's going to give up a day 1 pick for Trey Hendrickson. So, I mean, it makes sense, again, zoomed out, right? An elite sack producer on the edge in his prime, a team trying to win back-to-back Super Bowls. The asking price might not be that crazy. The Eagles have a ton of picks next year on day 2 and day 3. So a lot of people would be interested, right, in that situation. But I think the Eagles will say no on this if he's available, and I would too. As good as Trey Hendrickson has been, and as good as he is right now, you are likely going to end up paying for what he's been, not for who he is. Maybe you'll get a few more really good years out of this guy. And he's had, back-to-back 17.5 sack seasons, 14 sacks before that. The most sacks in the league the last 3 years. It's Trey Hendrickson, it's Myles Garrett, and it's TJ Watt, right? He's one of the top 3 elite edge rushers of this past half a decade, these last 5 years since he went from the Saints to the Bengals. I think he's been one of the most underrated players in football. But again, he's 30 years old. How many more great years does he have? He probably will age well for his style. I think he will age well as a pass rusher, but his mind space right now is all about resetting the market. It's about justice and getting what he deserves, what he's earned. It's very similar to Hassan Reddick's mindset last year, where at this point he's probably considering holding out. He said he's probably not going to play this year without a new contract. So, I think he could age well. I think he's still going to have a couple really good years still left in him where you'll get 14 plus sacks in a season. But if his mindset was different, I'd consider it more. But I think he wants $30+ million a year. He might want that Myles Garrett contract. He says, Garrett got it. I want it too. And the Eagles they just don't normally make that kind of move. They're not going to give that to a player that's 30 years old. Even at a premier position like this, that's so good at getting to the quarterback, even in a Super Bowl window that they're in, considering what the Eagles' theme of this offseason's been with cutting costs, with saving money for the future, with guys like Jalen Carter needing future contracts and potentially Nolan Smith and having long-term flexibility, all of the offensive players you're paying. I think with all that being said, and considering, again, Hendrickson wants to probably reset the market, I don't think they'll consider it, and I wouldn't really in this situation either. I don't think he'll be worth the number he gets in a couple years. I don't. I still think he'll be a very good player, but if you're going to give somebody $30+ million a year this year on a long-term deal, I better know I'm getting at least 3 to 4 more years where I'm getting 12, 13, 14 plus sacks. I think you're going to get 1 or 2 more of those out of Hendrickson. Is he going to be 33, 34, 35, and he's still giving you that? I'm not sure. So maybe in like 2026, if his market is cheaper, like if, in a year, this might make more sense for the way the Eagles like to do things. But I think Trey Hendrickson right now is seeing dollar signs. And although on the surface, it seems like something the Eagles would normally be interested in, if you actually look at their track record, this is not a move that they normally make. And I don't know. I don't think it's going to end up resolving itself in Cincinnati with Hendrickson staying there. I think a team will probably be interested in trading for him and paying him. But that's the thing is, like, not only do you have to give up a $30+ million a year contract for a 30-year-old pass rusher, which you didn't want to do last year for Hassan Reddick, by the way. That's another reason I think the Eagles wouldn't consider this. Reddick was one of those top 5 players as well in sack production over a 4-year span, and they didn't pay him. So are they going to pay Hendrickson? Probably not. $30+ million a year, and you got to give up a second-round pick or a third plus. I don't think that's going to happen. So we'll see. Maybe his market is just nothing. Maybe he'll sign a short-term 2 to 3 year deal where you can really give him a lot of money up front right now. But I think it's very unlikely the Eagles will be interested, just based on the current state of their roster. But always fun to consider, and if they did it, would I be shocked? No, because nothing Howie Roseman does shocks me, but I would probably guess that they will not trade for Trey Hendrickson. All right, guys, that's going to do it for today's edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. Thanks so much for making us your first listen each and every day. I'll be back tomorrow. The minute the Eagles 2025 schedule is released, we'll have a post-schedule podcast for you right here on Locked On Eagles. Until then, though, thanks as always for downloading, watching, and listening, and let's go Birds. Fly, Eagles, fly.